morning. My name is Jeremy. I'm one of the pastors here. I just want to say welcome. Glad that you are with us. A few things by way of announcement before we dive into 1 Samuel. The first is, one of the things that we do as a church is that we like to offer you guys resources that, we have curated that we feel like would be helpful for you in terms of just living the Christian life. And so one of those resources, they're for sale basically at cost at our Connect table. And so we have a new one that is for sale. Probably one of those books for me that I would say is almost a yearly read. And so this book is by Dane Ortland. It's called Gentle and Lowly. And so I would highly recommend that to you guys. And so again, you can get that at our Connect table. And those are on sale now. The other thing is on your seats, when you walked in, you had a purple book. Those are our sermon booklets. I want to just encourage you guys to take that with you and to hold on to that. Mainly hold on to it because we haven't ordered that many. And so if you lose it, that's kind of it. So, but hold on to that. But not only that, but use it, write stuff down. Our hope through this series in particular is there's a lot of things that it provokes in us, that it stirs in us, questions that we want to wrestle with. And so that book is great, not only for taking notes here, but then taking to your group. Write stuff down, take it to your group during the week, use that. It's hopefully something that you can have that becomes a helpful resource to you. So I just want to point your attention to that. Go ahead and make sure you grab that on your way out today. Okay, 1 Samuel is where we are. We're starting in a new series, so it's a good time to be new with us. And as we jump into the book of 1 Samuel, particularly here as we jump into the Old Testament, and specifically this genre that is called Old Testament narrative, I think there can be this underlying assumption, okay? Many of you might be here and you might be thinking, what does an Old Testament book that was written hundreds and hundreds of years ago, what does that have to do with my life now? Look, it's okay. You can be honest. I know you're thinking it, and that's a good thought, but here's what I want to make sure we don't miss, okay? Even though we might have that underlying assumption, I don't want us to quickly discard the immense power and the deep practical application that a book like 1 Samuel can have for our life. Because as we walk through this book, one of the things that you're going to realize is that this book has all of the characters, the plot twists, all of the different things that I think, all the suspense that you would see in a really gripping miniseries on Netflix. And the reason that I feel like it has that is because this book, essentially 1 Samuel, is a mirror that we can hold up to our life, that we can look at. It is a mirror that reflects back to us with vivid clarity the realities of our everyday life. A book that was written hundreds of years ago, we hold up, and I would say that it is a mirror that shows us with vivid clarity the things that are going on in your life today. Now, here's what we all have to understand. Every single one of us in this room, we have to understand that all of us are interpreting reality. Subconsciously or consciously, we are living every single day trying to interpret the realities around us. These are the why questions in life. These are the questions that we ask. Why do I struggle with this addiction? Why did my parents get divorced? Why do I feel so depressed? Why are people so mean to me? Why can't I seem to be happy? Why? And the list goes on and on and on. We're asking these questions, and in asking these questions, essentially what we are trying to do is we are trying to interpret reality. We're trying to figure out what all of this means. But oftentimes, the problem is that in interpreting those realities around us, we often look to sources that give us a faulty reflection, that give us a skewed image. You can think about it this way. One of the things that we love to do when we were back in North Carolina is we love to take our kids to a place, it was called the Science Center. It's kind of like our Discovery Center here. And the Science Center was full of all kinds of fun experiments, and it had a bunch of animals. And one of the things that it had was it had kind of a hall of mirrors, teaching you about concave and convex and all that kind of stuff. And so we would walk through with our kids, and we would walk through this hall of mirrors, and it was just funny, right? Because you go and you'd see how your image was distorted as you walk past all of these mirrors. Of course, my kids thought the one that made me look super short and wide was the most funny one. But you walk through, and you see, as you see these mirrors, you see yourself kind of, your image distorted and skewed. And I think that can be true of us in the places that we look in our life in order to find the answers to the questions that we're looking for to interpret reality. Many of the places that we turn to on a daily basis, take social media, for example, or take the modern psychology of self-help, or maybe looking through the lens of a certain political party. They do not reveal to us what is actually true about us or what is true about the world around us. Many of these things that we look to, they are only giving us partial truths, maybe half truth at best. And so we see most often in interpreting the realities around us, all we see is kind of a skewed image. We don't actually see with vivid clarity, but when we open the Bible, and especially books like 1 Samuel, it reveals to us, again, with such clarity, not only the harsh realities of the world that we live in, but the God who intervenes in the midst of it. And so I would say that 1 Samuel, a book that was written hundreds and hundreds of years ago, actually interprets the reality of the world that you are living in right now better than anything else that you are looking to interpret that reality. That's my argument as we go through this book, and I hope that you'll see that that is the case. So we need this book. We need it to help see, to interpret the realities of life around us. We can't do it without it. Now, a few other things that we need to just kind of, by way of introduction, before we keep going along in the book of 1 Samuel. One of the other things that we need to do is we need to ask ourselves every single week 2 questions, okay? These questions are very important, and these essentially will make or break how we walk through this book. All right? The first question is, as we walk through 1 Samuel, we have to ask ourselves, what is this telling me about God? What is this story? What is this specifically telling me about God? And then the second thing we have to ask ourselves is, what is this revealing about myself? What does this tell me about God? What does this reveal about myself? Now, here's the thing. We got to make sure that we don't get those things mixed up. All right? Now, I've used this example before, and I'm sure you can relate to it, but if you're ever watching your favorite action movie, okay, so for me, that would be The Bourne Identity. You're watching your favorite action movie, okay, let's just all be honest. As we're watching that, who is it that we identify with in that movie? Like, of course we identify with the main character who has all the nunchuck skills, you know? Like, they're like the baddest person in the movie. We identify with, like, I'm not sitting there watching The Bourne Identity saying, you know what? I really identify with that nameless security guard that just got knocked off in the first scene. Like, I don't, that's not how I think. No, I'm Jason Bourne. That's how I want to be the hero in the story. Now, we got to be careful. Because when we get to the Bible, when we look at these stories, we have to be careful not to interpret them through that lens. Because the reality of 1 Samuel, the reality of all of the Bible is that God is the hero. He is the one doing the rescuing. And so if we don't get that right, if we don't understand what is this telling me about God and what is this telling me about myself, then our primary concern when we come to these texts, it can be something like, well, how am I supposed to be more like Hannah? Or how am I supposed to be more like Samuel? Or how am I supposed to be more like David? That is not our primary concern. Our primary concern is, how does God show me more of my need for Him? And what we're going to see, even in the Old Testament, how does He show me more of my need for Jesus? And He's going to do that in and through the life of these characters. And so the last thing then that we need to see is this. We need to remember that we read the Bible front to back, but we interpret the Bible back to front, okay? So we read the Bible from front to back, from Genesis to Revelation, from the creation of all things all the way to Revelation, the consummation of all things. But even though that's the direction that we read, we have to interpret the Bible back to front. Here's what I mean by that. Sally Lloyd-Jones, who wrote just that incredible work, the Jesus Storybook Bible, an incredible resource if you're a parent. It's just a fun way to not only understand the Bible, but I would say to understand it in probably the most truest, right sense. Here's what Sally Lloyd-Jones says. She says, people think that the Bible is a book of heroes, showing you people who you should copy. The Bible does have some heroes in it, but most of the people in the Bible aren't heroes at all. They make some big mistakes. They get afraid and they run away. At times, they are downright mean. There are lots of stories in the Bible, but all of the stories, this is what it means to interpret the Bible back to front, but all of the stories are telling one big story, the story of how God loves His children and comes to rescue them. So we read the Bible front to back, but we interpret the Bible back to front. All right, so here's the big idea for 1 Samuel chapter 1. That was a very long introduction to kind of set up the entire book, but as we dive into 1 Samuel 1 in particular, here's the big idea. In the gospel, we have our true source of self-worth, security, and satisfaction. I'm going to say those 3 words today ad nauseam. You're going to be sick of hearing those 3 words. But they're important for us to understand because they're essential to what all of us are looking for in our life. So in the gospel, we have our true source of self-worth, security, and satisfaction. Here's what I want to do. I want to look at 3 things. As we walk through 1 Samuel 1, I want to look at the hopeless situation that Hannah finds herself in. Okay? This is a problem. Hannah has a problem. But then I want to look at the solutions. There's some solutions that are offered there. They're faulty solutions. But then lastly, I want to see how is it that we see Hannah's salvation in this story, okay? So, a hopeless situation, false solutions, and then true salvation. Let's start with the hopeless situation. a hopeless situation. Chapter 1 introduces us to a problem. It's Hannah's problem. Here's what it says in verse 2. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. That is significant to understand what's going on here. It's a very short phrase there, but it's very important to understanding all of what is happening in this first chapter. So for our modern understanding, specifically here, I think from a vantage point that we have, a limited vantage point, we have to ask, okay, well, why is this a major problem for Hannah? I think it can be hard for us to understand where we're sitting here today. It can be hard for us to understand why this is a issue. But if you look back in a lot of the Jewish tradition and a lot of the ancient Jewish texts, one of the things that you find, so take for example the Jewish Talmud. It's an ancient Jewish text, and one of the things that the Jewish Talmud says is it says that there's a statement in there that says that women who were barren, in Hannah's day, it was as if they were as good as dead. Walter Brueggemann, he's an incredible Old Testament scholar. Here's what Walter Brueggemann says. I think this brings so much clarity to this. He says, barrenness in ancient text is the effective metaphor of hopelessness. You say, well, why is that the case? Well, for without children, there was no foreseeable future for yourself, for your family, or for your people. So let's think about that for a second, okay? Why is this such a problem for Hannah that she cannot bear children? Well, in Hannah's day, it was an agrarian society, and so in a farming context, one of the things that you need to farm the land is you need people. And one of the ways to get people is you have children. And so in her context, in order to have more people work the land in your family, you had more kids. And so if you had more kids, again, you had more workers. And if you had more workers, you were able to produce more crop. And if you produce more crop, you're able to produce more money. And so the family was dependent upon having lots of children in order to make a living, if you will. But not only that, you think about it, there was no retirement plan. Like there was no Canadian pension plan. There was no RSP back then. So in order for them to have safety and security in retirement, they had lots of kids. That's why I have lots of kids. I'm banking on one of them to take care of me in old age, you know? That's my retirement plan. But in this day, there's no retirement plan. And so in order for them to know that they're going to be taken care of in their old age, they need to have lots of kids. And then lastly, not just on a family level, but on a societal level, larger families led to larger, more powerful nation states. So you take the family, you take the nation, the societal, and you put all those together, and what you realize is that in Hannah's day, what made Hannah valuable and significant in her society, it was completely deficient in her life. The thing that society says to her, this is what makes you valuable, is missing in her life. And so it says, look in verse 7, it says that she was so depressed that she refused to eat. So now fast forward to today. David Brooks, who is a prolific author and a well-known writer for the New York Times, he wrote a book recently called The Second Mountain. And in the book, The Second Mountain, essentially what he's doing is he's answering the question, why is it that so many young people, young adults, specifically coming out of university or out of trade school, going into their careers, why is it that they are struggling so much and experiencing so much frustration in life? And what he says is, in this book, he says the reason that so many in our younger demographic, the reason that they are struggling is because they cannot, nor are we giving them the answer to probably one of life's greatest questions which is, what makes life significant? We have nothing to give them. On a more superficial level, he says we have nothing to give them when it comes to what makes a person happy. So you have all these young people going out into their careers, and they don't have no idea as to what actually makes life significant. So here's what Brooks says. He says, so we hand them an empty box of authenticity. He says, look inside yourself. Find your inner passion. You are amazing, a snowflake, a sunbeam, a skittle. Find your truth. He says, this is useless too, because the you that we tell them to consult for life's answers is the very thing that hasn't yet formed. So they put down that empty box and they ask, well, what cause can I devote myself to that will inspire me and give me meaning and direction to my life? So that we realize that box doesn't work, so we hand them the empty box of freedom. So the world's yours, go for it. Then we realize that doesn't work, so we hand them the empty box of possibility. And we realize that doesn't work, so we hand them the empty box of autonomy, and on and on and on this goes, and the frustration continues to mount. Some of you are right there, you're like, yes, I experienced that frustration. People don't know or haven't been able to tell me what is the purpose of life, what is significant. And here's what Brooks says. Here's how he concludes it all. He says, how is it then in regards to the biggest question of all, where can I find significance? He says, we have nothing to say. Here's the thing. Every culture in every generation tries to tell us, tries to impose upon us what it is that is supposed to make us happy and significant. So in Hannah's day, it was childbearing. In order for her to feel significant and valued in her culture, she had to have children. Now, in our day, we might be sitting here and we might say, okay, we're beyond that. We've grown beyond that. In our day, it might not be having children, but it can certainly be for some, not in having children, but the success of our children. Let me explain this. So a couple of summers ago, I was golfing with my cousin. And one of the things that my cousin is responsible for in his job is he handles all the disciplinary cases that come through for youth hockey and PEI. And so, I was very intrigued by this. And so I was asking him, well, how many disciplinary cases do you get? And like, what constitutes a disciplinary case? And so a disciplinary case would be, let's just say you have a kid in U15 and he gets in fights. And it's kind of escalated, and so they need to go beyond penalizing him, and this might mean suspending him for a long period of time or whatever it may be, or maybe a kid has some type of egregious penalty, that was blatant. So he handles all these disciplinary cases and tries to figure out how they're going to deal with it in regards to suspensions or whatever it may be. So we start talking about this, and I start realizing, as he's kind of laying it out, I'm realizing, you know what? How many of those disciplinary cases do you think are actually the kids playing hockey? Come to find out, it's actually way more significant, the disciplinary cases, for parents. In fact, about three quarters of the disciplinary cases that he handles have nothing to do with the kids. It has to do with the parents. Fighting in the parking lot, fighting in the stands, chasing after the referee. And I started thinking about that. I'm like, why is it that 3/4 of the disciplinary cases that he handles for youth hockey and PEI have to do with the parents? The reason is that the same thing that drives two parents with little kids in a respectable job to duke it out in the parking lot of some rink in Cornwall, PEI, that's the same thing that is driving Hannah here to refuse to eat. See, we are all searching for that thing in our life that we think will make us okay and will solve all of our problems. Maybe it's not having children. Maybe it's the success of the children that we do have. Again, in Hannah's day, it was having children. Hannah finds herself in the midst of this hopeless situation. But here's the thing. In the midst of Hannah's hopeless situation, it reveals something that I think is very helpful to us. What it reveals to us is that most of, if not all, of the disappointments and the dissatisfaction in our life, most of those that we experience flow from us looking to something else, something beyond God, in order to find three things: our self-worth, our security, and our satisfaction. Most of the dissatisfaction, most of the disappointment that you are experiencing in your life, that I experience in my life, boils down to us looking to something else to find those three things: self-worth, security, satisfaction. Self-worth, this is the identity question. This is a question that looks in the mirror every day and you ask yourself, who am I? To the core of who I am, who am I? This is the athlete who spends their whole life playing a sport, plays professionally, retires, and then struggles mightily because they don't know who they are. Their whole life has been wrapped up in the identity of being an athlete, and now that they're not that, they don't know who they are. So our self-worth, it's an identity thing. What about your security? This is what gives us a sense of safety and control. This is what makes you know or think that you know that the future is going to be okay. This is the thing that you lay in bed at night and you think about and you stress about. Will my future be okay? And however you answer that, that's the thing that you're going to for security. So you have self-worth, you have security, and then lastly, satisfaction. This is what gives us joy. This is what gives us purpose. This is what gets us up in the morning. If security is the thing that keeps us awake at night, satisfaction is the thing that gets us up in the morning. All of us need those things. Every single one of us. We need them. And our hearts are searching for them, and the major disappointments and the major dissatisfactions of our life that we experience, more often than not, what they are smoke to a fire. Here's what I mean by that, okay? So in our house that we currently are living in, the smoke detectors are very sensitive, okay? So it doesn't matter if you're like making toast, making bacon, like for whatever reason, like they go off. And they're ones that are connected to the whole house. So it's like, I mean, it just, panic sets in, like panic sets in. I'm waiting one day for the fire department to show up. They still haven't, which is slightly concerning. But, so the smoke detectors go off. Now imagine for a second that the smoke detectors go off, and instead of inspecting where the fire is, all we do is address the smoke. So we're just trying to like wave the smoke out of the house. We don't really even think about, well, there might be a fire. Well, that would be silly, right? Because if you address the smoke and you never actually deal with the fire, you're not actually dealing with the problem. And too often in our life, that's what we tend to do. We see these dissatisfactions and disappointments. They are the smoke to the fire. We try to just deal with what is making us dissatisfied. We never actually trace it back down to see what is it at the core that is making me feel disappointed or dissatisfied. So here's what I want to do. I think there's two statements that you can ask yourself. Two statements that you can write down and say, okay, how I answer the end of this question, this is very telling for me as to where it is that I'm looking for my self-worth, security, and satisfaction. Here's the first statement. I would be okay if only I had blank. How do you answer that? I would be okay if only I had blank. Here's another statement. In order for life to be good, I need blank. In order for life to be good, I need, what is it? What is it? For Hannah, it was a child. For us, there's a multiplicity of things that it could be. So let's look at what are some of the solutions that are thrown our way. There's some that we see here in this text. So the second thing is there's some false solutions. So we have the problem, we have the hopeless situation, but then we have these false solutions. So Elkanah, Hannah's husband, he's first up. He attempts to solve this problem for her. What does he say in verse 8? It says, Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? What Elkanah is doing here is he's offering her a alternative solution. You can think of it this way, okay? One of the greatest scenes of all times in all movies is the boulder scene in Indiana Jones. You know the boulder scene where he's being chased by the boulder? Pretty sure that's in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Is that right? And so you have this scene where Indiana Jones is standing before this little stone podium, and there's a golden statue on the podium, right? And he realizes that in order for him to take this statue, he's got to replace it because there's some type of, booby trap that's like going to trigger it. And so he's standing there. He's got this bag of coins, I think, is in his hand, and he's standing there, and he realizes he's got to be the same. Because if it's not the same, then it's going to make this thing trip, and something's going to happen, right? And so he does this little switch, and he switches it, and he puts this bag of coins on the podium there, and for a second, it seems like everything's okay. Until the boulder comes out and chases him, and it smushes him, and he dies. Just kidding. You should have watched the movie. You would have known that that's not true. But you think about that scene, right? That scene, to me, I think, is a beautiful depiction, maybe a scary depiction of what all of us are doing in our life. See, in our life, we go after something or someone other than Jesus to find the solution for our self-worth, satisfaction, and security. And so what we do is we stand there and we think, okay, this looks similar. It feels similar. I think this will work. And so we try to put that on our heart. We try to put that on the throne of our heart. And we think, man, I can replace this with this, and I think it'll be okay. The reality is anything that we put on the throne of our heart that is not Jesus will ultimately lead to our disappointment and dissatisfaction. These are solutions that are false. They don't work. So in this story here, what are some of those solutions? Well, I think there's internal solutions and external solutions. All right? What do I mean by internal solutions? Well, these are solutions to finding self-worth, security, and satisfaction that arise from inside of us. Okay? So, for example, Elkanah, he offers the solution of his love. What does he say there in verse 10? He says, am I not more to you than 10 sons? What is he saying? Think about what he's saying there for a second. Translation is, what you are looking for in a child, you should find in me. You should find in my love. So his love is a proposed solution to Hannah's self-worth, security, and satisfaction. And of course we know, look, a husband's love, a spouse's love, it is a good thing. But one of the things that we got to realize and be on guard against is that anything, a good thing that tries to take place of a God thing will always be the wrong thing. Any good thing that tries to take place of a God thing, it will always be the wrong thing. So you think about love. Just take love, for example. Ernest Becker, he's an atheist scientist. Here's what Ernest Becker said specifically about love. He says the love partner becomes the divine ideal. This is an atheist. Becomes the divine ideal which to fulfill one's life. What is it that we want when we elevate the love partner to this position? We want redemption. We want nothing less. We want to be rid of our faults, of our feeling of nothingness. And then he says this, no human relationship can bear the burden of godhood. So love's a good thing, but it won't work as a God thing. So Elkanah's solution isn't going to work. So what is the internal solutions? The question for you is, what are the internal solutions that you are looking to in order to find self-worth, security, and satisfaction? You know how you know? You know how you know maybe that one of these is playing out in your life? You know that by the voice that's playing in your head, that this is the I statements. It's the voice that's saying inside of you, I need. So maybe for some of you, that's, I need the love of my husband in order to feel worthy. I need to be married in order to be secure. I need to be accepted in order to feel happy. I need my kids to be the best in order to be satisfied. Maybe you can even throw it into the morality category. And you think, man, I need to be moral. I need to be good. I need to live up to a certain moral standard in order to feel worthy. These are the internal solutions. I need. What is it for you? But there's also external solutions that are offered to Hannah in this story. We started talking about these. This is the one that Penina says. She provides an external solution. So look back at verse 6. It says, and her rival used to provoke her grievously, to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Penina there was provoking her. The word literally means to thunder or to roar. You know that the only other times that word is used in the Bible is actually used to talk about a storm, like a hurricane. This is the only time it's used in the Bible to talk about someone's emotions. Every other time, it's specifically talking about a raging storm. What the writer is trying to get us to see here is he's helping us to see the emotional carnage that is taking place in Hannah's heart because of the societal pressures to have a child. This is what social media has become in our culture. This is what it is. You think about it. We have rivals on Instagram. We have rivals on Facebook. We have rivals on Snapchat. And what they are doing is they create these constant reminders that you don't have what they say that you're supposed to have in order for you in your life to have self-worth, security, and satisfaction. They're constantly provoking us, constantly reminding us of that. Now, listen, I think all of us understand how reminders work, okay? If you're like me, then you have multiple systems set up in your life. And so I have about 3 or 4 different reminder systems set up. I have my phone with the reminders app. Then I have the voice memos, just in case the other one didn't work. Then I have 2 notebooks. And so I have 4 different reminders, okay? So if I ever forget something, you can make fun of me thoroughly, all right? Because I know in my life, I need these reminders. Like all of us in our life, we need things that help us remember. You know one area that we don't need help reminding? We don't need it in this area. Because we live in a culture that is constantly trying to remind us, to impress upon us the things that it thinks will give us self-worth, security, and satisfaction. You do not need a reminder for that. When you walk out of your house and you walk down the street and you look at your neighbors, or when you go on social media, or when you turn on the TV, we are constantly being reminded of the things that society is telling you that you need in your life to feel self-worth, security, and satisfaction. They're all around us. These are the external solutions. And the way that you discern the external pressures, it's not the I statements, but it's by identifying the subtle or oftentimes not so subtle statements that blast all around you. You need a successful career in order to know that you are worth something. That's what you need. You need a large bank account to be secure. You need to find your true self in order for you to have fulfillment. These are the statements that are being blasted all around us that give us proposed but false external solutions to dealing with the ultimate problem. So here's the question that we have to wrestle with today. What are these statements in your life? Like, what are the I statements that are playing out? What are the things that in your head that says, I need this in order to feel self-worth, security, and satisfaction? What are the you statements that you're giving into? What are those you statements that you're reminded of that just kind of nag at you, that provoke you, like Peninnah was provoking Hannah here? So, we get to this part, and in verse 9, there's a turn. Verse 9, it says this, look. It says, after they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. You see in the story that Hannah's got nowhere else to turn. She can't turn to her husband. She's got no friends. She can't even turn to the priest. You look at Eli and his response. He's useless. She can't turn to her husband. She can't turn to the religious leaders. She's got nowhere else to turn. But then it says she stood up. Hannah rose. Now, this is important because we can miss this, okay? This word here is not just talking about her physical posture. It's not just saying that she stood up physically. She certainly did that. What this word is trying to get us to see is that she made decisive action. Something shifted in her mind. Something shifted in her heart. And what is that? Well, she doesn't respond to Peninnah. She doesn't respond to Elkanah. She goes to the temple. What does she do? She turns to God. And here's what you begin to realize, and here's what all of us need to begin to see. Hannah realizes something that all of us, something that I need to realize about, that God's tendency is to make our total inability his starting place. That's where God begins. God's tendency in our life is to make our total inability, that's the starting place. That's where he begins to do some of his best work in our life. And so we see Hannah's salvation, the true salvation. This is the third thing. The true salvation. Notice now what she does in her pain. In the midst of what she is feeling, she doesn't blame God. She doesn't bargain with God. What she does is she takes it to God with all of her emotion, and she begins to trust God. Look what she says in verse 15. She says, I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Hannah's doing what the psalmist does in Psalm 142, verse 2. In Psalm 142, 2, it says, I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. And as Hannah does that, something changes. Something begins to shift. And you say, okay, how is it that we know that something is changing in her heart? There's two indications. Two very clear indications in this text that Hannah's heart is changing. The first is the vow that she makes. Now, for us, we read that, and we're not even sure what exactly a Nazirite vow is, but we read that, and we can just kind of wash over. But it's very significant for us in understanding how Hannah's heart changed. So the first is this vow that she makes. Look at verse 11. It says that she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord. Listen, all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. There's a few guys in this church that are amening that one. No razor shall touch his head. Now, what is that? Well, she vows a Nazirite vow. All right, so what is a Nazirite vow? Well, in the Hebrew tradition, you could not become a priest unless you were born into the Levitical line of priests, unless you were from the tribe of Levi. And so in order to become a priest, you were born into this Levitical tribe, unless you made a Nazirite vow. A Nazirite vow was a lifetime vow to become part of the priesthood. So if you wanted to become a priest and you weren't part of the tribe of Levi, you could make a Nazirite vow and you would become a priest for life. So here, Hannah, you see this. She makes that vow for her son. You go all the way to the end of the chapter in verse 28. You see it for a lifetime. Now, think about this. Okay, this is very important. She renounces everything that would have been valuable for her having a son. You think about that? Like her saying that she's going to devote her son over to the Lord for a lifetime. What that means is that she renounces everything that would have been valuable for her having a son. I mean, just think about it. You don't have to be a mother to understand this. What she's saying is that there's no walking around the market with her son at her side. It's not going to happen. What she's saying is that there's going to be no Hebrew play dates with other moms and children. Like, they're not going to happen. She's recognizing that there is going to be no graduations, no birthday celebrations in her home. What is happening? Why is Hannah doing this? Well, she's doing it because the source and the object of her joy and satisfaction has shifted. It's changed. The source of her joy and the source of her satisfaction has shifted. She prayed for a son, but then laid aside any benefits a son could give her. So that's the first indication. The second indication, though, is the order of events, is how things play out here in verse 17 through 20. We can miss this. Look at verse 17. It says, "Then Eli answered, 'Go in peace. And the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him.' And she said, 'Let your servant find favor in your eyes.' Then the woman went her way and ate, okay, and her face was no longer sad." Think about the order of actions here. She went away, she ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning, and they worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah knew his wife, Hannah, and the Lord remembered her, and in due time Hannah conceived. Listen, and in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel. What do I mean by order of events? Look, here's the first order, prayer. So Hannah goes to the Lord in prayer. Prayer. There it is. Hannah goes to the Lord in prayer. So now you would think, okay, what's the next logical thing that would lead to Hannah? You would think it would go prayer, then pregnancy, and then peace. But it doesn't go that way, right? What comes next? Prayer, and then what does it say? She finds peace. It goes prayer, peace, and then later on, the last thing is pregnancy. Prayer, peace, then pregnancy. So what's happening here? Hannah's free. The source of her joy and security is now God. Something has shifted in her heart. She poured out her soul, and then listen, her soul was settled. What Hannah realized is that her joy, her self-worth, security, and satisfaction was not in the presence of a baby, it was in the presence of God in her life. That's what she realized. Prayer, peace, then pregnancy. But here's the thing, this is it. This is the entire story of 1 Samuel. This thing here, what Hannah experiences on an individual level is what we're going to see. This is what Israel is wrestling with on a national level. This is the whole story of 1 Samuel. Where do we find our self-worth, security, and satisfaction? Where does it come from? Hannah, she's seeking it on a personal level. She thinks it's in having a baby. All of her problems are solved by having a baby. Israel, they think that all of their problems are solved by having an earthly king. And what you realize is that every single one of us is on a search. We are all searching for the thing that we think will give us self-worth, security, and satisfaction. Why are we all on a search? We're all on a search because all of us realize that there's a deficiency. The reason that we're searching after those things is because we feel deep down to the core of who we are. Maybe you won't acknowledge it, but the reality is we all feel that way. We know that there is some deficiency in us, and so we go after the answer. We go searching for the thing that we think will solve all of our problems and make everything okay. And here's the thing, okay? Let's just be honest. The truth is, a baby probably would have made Hannah feel better for a little while. Like it would have. Like it would have covered it up for a little while. But then the diapers and the late nights and all that, that reality sets in. Like for you, a larger paycheck, that might make you feel secure, for a little while. That might help you sleep at night, for a couple months. Until some health diagnosis comes up or whatever it may be. That relationship that you are longing for, you might get it and you might feel self-worth, for a bit. It might help satisfy it for a season. But what we have to realize is that all of those things they're only covering up the deeper deficiency that we have. A couple weeks ago, my wife woke up and she went out to the sink and she was like, oh my gosh. She was like, something is dead in there. Something had crawled up and died in our sink. And so I was like, oh man, yeah, it's bad. So I began on this quest to try to cover up the smell. I was like, I'm not taking these pipes apart, And so I started trying to cover it up. So I took bleach, poured a bunch of bleach down there. I'm like, that'll do the trick. And it did for like 15 minutes. And then Julianne came home and was like, nope, it's not. And I was like, okay, let me try baking soda and vinegar. So I like poured that down there. And it covered it up like for like an hour. And then the smell came right back. It was awful, okay? I'm like gagging just thinking about it. And what I realized was like, all I'm trying to do is like cover up the smell. If I want to get rid of it, I actually have to get rid of what's in the pipes making it stink. So, of course, like I did what any man did. I called a plumber, you know? and he came and fixed it. You know, it's like, man, I could have kept doing that over and over, like coming up with all the concoctions and doing everything I could to cover it up. And it was working for a couple minutes. But I wasn't dealing with the problem. What was stinking was still in the pipes. And it wasn't until we got it out of there that the smell went away. And when we read 1 Samuel, what we have to realize is that our real shame, Hannah's real problem, comes from us breaking relationship with our Creator. Our real shame, our real deficiency is in the fact that in our sin, we are separated from God. We are separated from the one who loves us and created us. So when you turn to this story and we read it, what you see is, in actuality, if you think about it, like a baby actually was the solution. A king for Israel actually was the solution. It was just not the one that they were looking for and longing for. See, there would be a baby who would come many years later, and that baby would be the king. He would be the King of Kings. And it's that baby and it's that king that the Bible shows us actually fills the void in our heart that we are looking for to fill us in terms of our self-worth, security, and satisfaction. That's Jesus. So what 1 Samuel is helping us to see is that, yes, we do need a baby, just not the baby that Hannah's looking for. We need Jesus. Because what Jesus did is he came along and he filled that void. Jesus took away the real shame that we feel. Jesus fulfilled the deficiency, the real and true deficiency that we have. Jesus did that. And what we have to realize is that in the gospel, like Hannah, God, he hears us. There's a beautiful thing in this story. There's one of these like breadcrumbs. Think about what did Hannah name her son? Samuel. And Samuel means God has heard. So you think about Samuel's name, you think about Jesus, you think about us, and what you realize is that we know that in the midst of our search, when we are feeling the weight of that deficiency in our life, we know that God hears us. That God hears us because on the cross, God turned his face away from the cries of Jesus. And because God turned his face away from the cries of Jesus, we can rest assured that God will always hear us when we cry out to him. And that in Jesus, we have the very thing that fulfills all the self-worth, all the security, and all of the satisfaction that our hearts are longing for and that we're searching for. And so we can rest in the gospel and know that Jesus is offering us something that is so much better than whatever it is that you have been searching for. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for the beauty of this text. That, Father, reveals to us, that shows to us who we are in all of our desperate need for you. And so, God, would you just bring us to that place? Father, bring us to the place where we see our need for you. Not a little bit of a need on the side, but a need to the very core of who we are. And God, would we just acknowledge that? Knowing, Father, that you meet us in the midst of our inability. God, we need you. We can't get rid of the sin and shame in us. But God, Jesus did. And so we thank you for that. Father, would we rest in that? We pray this in Jesus' name.